Finding out?
It's hard to taste because
I
sometimes a
guess
lot
you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's what we wanted to. I've always been
So wow.
either that
Like it's borderline. I'm not sure. Just the walk. But this oh, okay.
you guys come on. You want one? Yes, please. All right, it is a cheat sheet for the treatments.
That's right.
And that way, when we're talking about tea through your tea one, you guys will go, oh, it's this one.
I think everyone's here who needs to be here. Let's do it. One more. You'll have to shut all thank you. We'll get started. Managed everyone got in. And there is some mead for you guys to try, plus one of Jack's mead. I know at a later date he's going to be having some sort of tasting with his actual treatment that you're going to hear about today. For it. I felt it was a little too much alcohol for a defense. That's what we wanted to do for bringing that in. But I'm pleased to introduce Jack Twiley, who is a master's student working for me, and he's been working on mead. For those of you who don't know mead, it's honey wine. And I think Jack's journey started about 30 years ago, so before he even knew fermentation science existed. He came to us from the IT industry. And oh, I'm going to mess up on the date. You got your bachelor's here in fermentation science in, I want to say 2012? 15. I was off by 4 years. 2015, and then he talked to me and came to investigate some mead, which you're going to hear all about today. So I'll leave it to Jack.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for the introduction. And thank you all for coming. If everyone's got their cheat sheets, then I think we're ready to go. And you can follow along on the adventure of learning about my research. If you are listening today. Excellent. On the left is a drawing from 8,000 years ago in a cave in Spain. That drawing depicts someone reaching into a hive to gather some honey and put it in a small container. Note the angry bees. That's 8,000 years ago, about the same time the drawing's next to it in the same cave. Now imagine you have this container of honey that you've just taken out of a hive, you put it down outside, and you go to sleep, you do whatever you do, and you wake up and it's rained on. Now it's fizzing. I wonder what that thing tastes like. This is what I think was the origination of mead, and that's why I think it's the oldest fermented beverage. They're still gathering honey the same way today. This is the last honey hunter. He's in Nepal. He's collecting psychotropic honey. It's mad honey, and it's worth a great deal of money to the right person. Do not make mead with this, because when you taste it, you hallucinate. There's evidence from 7000 BC of pot shards in China. People have been making mead for a very long time, but it started to decline around the time of the Romans, because the Romans, wherever they went, started planting grapes. In addition, in Northern Europe, there was a foraging area that used to be the place that honeybees would go, and then they started planting barley. So now that you have more grapes and barley, less honey, the price of wine and beer dropped, and the price of mead rose. Oops. So by the Renaissance, only the wealthy and the sick drank mead. Sir Kenelm Digby in 1669 released his list of his recipes, and his list of recipes has survived to the present day in such detail that you can actually make these meads yourself. He has a recipe that was the Queen Mother's favorite. It has ginger, cloves, and rosemary in it. But today we're having another kind of renaissance in the mead industry on the coattails of the craft brewing movement. The American Meat Makers Association, which is a trade association for mead, reported an 84% increase between 2012 and 2014 in sales, and 236 wineries making at least one mead, which is an increase of over 40 from the year before. So in order to stay in this market as it grows, these people are going to have to differentiate themselves on quality. I could give an entire presentation just on mead styles alone. This is a very quick overview. I'm focused on traditional mead, which is made with honey, water, and yeast. There are three broad categories based on things that are added to the must. For example, a braggot is either, if you're a guy downstairs, a beer with honey added, but in my case, it's a mead with added grain as an adjunct. A melomel is a mead that's made with added fruit or fruit juices, and a metheglin is a mead that's made with added spices. So the Queen Mother's favorite was probably a health tonic because metheglin and medicine come from the same Welsh root, and that's why it was for the sick to help them get better. There are finer details inside these groups. Melomels have major categories such as sizers and piments when it's made with apples or grapes respectively, but these are the groups most people work with today. Mead is made across the world as well. There's tej, which is an Ethiopian metheglin. It's made with the gesho root, and that's a medicinal herb. And in Uganda, they make, with malted sorghum flour, they make a braggot called anturi. This is a process flow diagram. This is how to make mead. First, you take your honey and you dilute it because yeast can't live very well, at least that we want to live in honey, because there's just too much of an osmotic pressure. Once you've diluted the honey, you can now pitch your preferred yeast, and this is the time when you would add nutrients for those yeast. Fermentation will begin and progress, and once fermentation is done, you rack off the lees, and you can bottle for either extended aging or immediate consumption. Honey is made by bees, which everyone knows, from the nectar from flowers. It's effectively a sugar suspension in water. 3/4 of honey by mass is made up of fructose and glucose. The ratio of fructose and glucose depends on the source nectar. Roughly 17 to 20% of the remaining mass is water. If it were much higher, then spontaneous fermentation would take place, and that's not what we want. The remaining percentage, roughly 5 to 8%, is organic acids, disaccharides, and minerals and proteins. Unfortunately, that's not, even after dilution, a good environment for yeast to grow and thrive. We need to add things. Yeast need, among other things, nitrogen to help them grow and multiply. Since honey has very little, we need to add some. It's possible to dump in a whole bunch of nitrogen right at the beginning, but that has hazards because there are other microorganisms that might want to consume some of those resources, and that could be bad. So people usually don't put the whole dose in once, they spread it out into multiple doses, and they do those either by time or by fermentation progress. I did a survey of about a dozen commercial mead makers, and they basically do time, progress, or a combination of both, and we'll go into more detail on that soon. Temperature is also a critical parameter, both for honey itself and for mead. Honey is very sensitive to temperature. Inside a hive, it gets to be about 105 degrees Fahrenheit, 35 degrees centigrade, and if you process honey at a higher temperature, you're going to lose what the bees have put in there. Some of the volatile chemicals, which are important to aroma and flavor, will go away. And you run the risk of increasing the amount of this guy, hydroxymethylfurfural. There's a buttery odor associated with HMF. I've never tasted it, but it is an excess heat treatment and spoilage indicator for honey. If you heat up the honey, you'll get more of it. Same thing happens with mead. If you store mead too high, you'll get more HMF, and that's a negative thing. However, if you've ever fermented anything, you know that warmer ferments go faster, which is great if you're trying to make money. The faster you can turn around your tanks, the more money you can make. But you need to be careful and keep an idea of balance. You need to balance your need for volume to your need for quality. And that's one of the things I want to look at, temperature. So now we're at my research hypothesis. Stated plainly, if you make mead under different fermentation conditions, the alternative hypothesis is that it will taste and smell differently. The null hypothesis, of course, is that there is no difference regardless of the conditions changed. And we're about to find out. These are the treatments that I use for my research. That survey, I talked to the folks about their temperatures, and they said 55, 65, 75, because they work in the Fahrenheit system. I converted those to Celsius for our purposes, and that's the translation up there. Those are the 3 most popular temperatures. The nutrient addition schedules were a lot more complicated. Everybody has their own, but the most common were based on time, 24, 48, and 72 hours, or on sugar depletion. How far through the ferment did they add the nutrients? There are people out there who are commercial meat makers who don't add nutrients at all, and so that's my control. And finally, there's something called TOSNA. It stands for Tailored Organic Staggered Nutrient Addition. It is a combination of time-based, 1 day, 2 day, 3 day. And there's a 4th one, which is either 1 week in or 1/3 sugar depletion, depending on which comes first. And so those are the 4 schedules. If you look at your cheat sheet, you'll see 12.8, 18.3, 23.9, and then A, B, C, D. This is what we're talking about. And that's your cheat sheet, so I don't have to go over this in any more detail. So these are the details on meat making. First, I would like to thank Karen Finlay at Queen Bee Apiaries for donating the honey. She treats her honey very carefully. She does not exceed 35 degrees C, so all the good stuff that bees put in there should be in there, and very little HMO. So it's the best honey I could ask for. In order to make a traditional semi-sweet mead, I had to reach certain targets of alcohol percentage and residual sugar. I did some math and determined that 23.8 bricks was the right strength for the must, and that in order to maintain sufficient volume for doing my tests, I needed to start with 3.5 liters of must. In order to do that, I need a little over 1 kilogram of honey and about 2.7 liters of water. We took pre- and post-fermentation samples, as well as other samples at the end. I tested the bricks and temperature every day. It was tested. I had help from undergraduates, which is very nice. And once we reached the appropriate addition level, whether it's the daily or the progress, is when additions were made. We'll talk more about what I added. At the end of fermentation, they were put in a cold room until replicates could be combined. They were topped off with SO2, and they were bottled for sensory analysis. Now I'm going to talk about the nutrients. Because I was using the Tailored Organic Staggered Nutrient Addition protocol for D, I used their equation, which is not seen here. I can share that later for other folks. And they use Fermate O with that style of nutrient addition. Fermate O is O for organic, and that's both the certified organic as well as the organic chemistry, meaning instead of having DAP, they have organic acids from yeast hulls, and that's the autolyzed yeast nutrient. When I applied the values I had for the type of yeast I was using and the must and the volume, I put about 3.3 grams of Fermate O into each of my replicants, except obviously the controls, which received none. And the manufacturer suggested using a slurry, so I made a slurry of 1 gram per 10 milliliters of winery water, and that's what I used to administer. And we will learn more about slurries later. Our winery across the street has fermenters, and instead of fermenting directly, I use them as water baths instead, because I was able to control the temperature of them using these glycol jackets connected to a red box off the screen. The water bath held the fermenters, those gallon-sized carboys, 1 each for the nutrient schedules A, B, C, and D, and that's how I could guarantee they were all at the same temperature. To do the wine chemistry data collection, I use standard equipment and processes that are found in wine labs the world over, so I don't need to discuss that in any more detail. This, however, merits more discussion. To do the aroma chemistry analysis, we use the GCMS that you see here, doing headspace solid phase micro extraction. HS Spini is a standard method used for quantitative analysis, I apologize. And the compounds that we targeted were through preliminary testing. Then we move on to sensory analysis. For sensory analysis, we had 20 panelists, 7 male, 13 female. We had 2 training sessions and 3 evaluation sessions. In all sessions, we used black tasting glasses with random 3-digit codes, and the samples were given in random order. The first 2 sessions, we trained the panelists on 10 different attributes, which I will talk a little bit more later. And in the last 3 sessions, we had the panelists evaluate the meads based on those 10 attributes. And they used a Qualtrics range from none to extreme. These are the standards that I mentioned before. We had 5 aroma and 5 flavor standards. I'm not going to talk about this in too much more detail, but those were the 10 things. We analyzed the statistical data for the wine chemistry and aroma chemistry using ANOVAs, and Tukey's honestly significant difference. For sensory and for aroma chemistry, we also use canonical discriminant analysis. This is a less common tool for analysis, so I'm going to describe it for you a little bit. It's used for dimensional reduction. When you have n treatments, you calculate n minus 1 factors. Each factor includes a value for each of the attributes that we were testing, so you can condense those 10 attributes down to a smaller number of factors. When you apply those factors to the means of the observed attributes, you can place the treatments in an n minus 1 dimensional way. And for us, the top 2 dimensions were fine, so I could plot them on paper. If the resulting values from applying those factors are sufficiently different, then the treatments themselves are sufficiently different. Now we're going to get to results. Schedule C exhibited signs of microbial spoilage. The root cause for this was I failed to refrigerate the slurry between additions. And as a result, treatments 3, 7, and 11 were removed from further analysis. So this table here is why you have the cheat sheet. I'm going to very quickly remind you the top 3 are the cold treatments. These 3 are the middle, and these are the warm. And inside the 3, it's the one without nutrients, the one with time-based, the one with TOSNA, all the way down. The very first thing I want you to notice is the days to complete fermentation. All it takes to cut your fermentation time in half is to use nutrients. That's all you have to do. You get a better than 50% reduction at any of these temperatures just by using nutrients. If you can't use nutrients or you want more reduction, increase the temperature, 105 to 48, another greater than 50% reduction, 48 to 31. Not quite as good, but still a reduction. When you combine the powers of both, you get a seriously significant reduction in time to market. So that's a very useful thing to know, but we're not sure what that means about our hypothesis. The other thing to notice, it's most striking in the days column, is the values for those that received nutrients are identical. They're the same. And in fact, if you look all the way across the table, they're statistically insignificant, the differences between the treatments that received nutrients through TOSNA or through the time-based method. So that's looking pretty interesting for our hypothesis as well. Finally, the YAM over here is lower for the treatments that had no nutrients because we didn't add any YAM. We may not have added DAP, but by adding those organic acids, we did add yeast-assimilable nitrogen, and these are higher. Similarly, the residual sugar is higher, and it's lower for the treatments that did receive nutrients, so they did a better job at converting the sugar. Because it would take a very long time to talk about all the aroma chemicals, I'm going to focus on those who were detected at levels above their aroma thresholds, or at least not below their aroma thresholds. These thresholds are in different compounds, ethanol, wine, and beer, for the 22 different compounds we searched for. And of these 22, we're down to 5. So I'm about to talk more about those 5. This is a CDA plot. I'm going to talk real quick about it to remind you. The factors that I discussed are evidence here, F1 and F2. Those percentages are how much of the difference is represented by those 2 factors. 95% plus is exhibited by the first 2 factors, so it's pretty effective. These are loadings. Those coordinates for ethyl butyrate in the bottom left there, that is the 2 values in the factor, in each of the factors for ethyl butyrate in those equations. When you take, for example, treatment 4, its coordinates are the sum of applying all the factors for all of these compounds. So over here, you'll notice that some circles are further away, like T1, T4, and T6, and those are significantly different. The others come up in little groups, like this group and this group. So these at touch are insignificantly different. T4 is characterized by ethyl hexanoate, ethyl decanoate, and 3-methyl-1-pentanol because of the direction that it's in. This group here is also characterized by those same compounds, but to a lesser extent because they're closer to the origin. T6 and T1, T5 and T9 are not characterized by any of these chemicals, these compounds that were detected. Now let's look from the perspective of temperature. You'll notice that they're very separate. F12.8 is further on the negative on the F1 axis, while 23.9 and 18.3 are separated on either side of the F2 axis. Ethyl butyrate is 23.9 is characterized by ethyl butyrate, 12.8 by ethyl octanoate, ethyl hexanoate, 3-methyl-1-pentanol, but not much for 18.3. That's not characterized by any of these compounds. So from the perspective of nutrient schedules, it's a little different story. You'll see A is further away. A received no nutrients. B and D are closer because they both received nutrients just in a slightly different way. And you'll see ethyl decanoate, ethyl hexanoate, ethyl octanoate, 3-methyl-1-pentanol on this side in the direction of D, but not B. And my guess, I haven't done enough research to call it a theory, but my guess is that the fact that D received its nutrient later meant that it produced more of those esters later, and thus they didn't have time to off-gas, whereas B's last nutrient addition was at 3 days in, and they had time to leave to volatilize off. So now that we've seen statistically different results for aroma chemistry, let's look at sensory. Much different kind of graph. You'll notice that T1 is the one treatment that's separate from the rest of these, and it's not even completely separate. It crosses over with T10 and T5. But every other treatment is indistinguishable for these 10 attributes. They may be distinguishable other ways, but for the 10 things that folks were tasting and recording, these were indistinguishable at the 95% level. They all line up under this lemon-honey axis, where T1 is off in the warm and the fruity direction. So if we made these meads under different temperatures and different nutrient addition conditions, and for the most part, they can't be distinguished, that's bad news for our hypothesis. So, my conclusions are, you have two things you can take away from a presentation. You can speed up your fermentation significantly without significantly impacting quality by raising your temperature and by using nutrients. And don't sweat the complicated protocol. Once every day for 3 days is just as good as Tosma. Little, if any, difference was seen. For future work, it's clear that there's a lot more room to grow at different temperatures. How high does the temperature have to be in order to see those negative effects that we were worried about at the beginning? What about schedules? What would happen if you added once every 12 hours? Or what happens if you gave a gap in the middle to try and do what I think D might have done to capture those esters later? There's a lot of room to explore. In addition, the fact is the meat industry is not big enough for someone like Scott Labs to start making individual tailored nutrient blends. Take advantage of honey's special things that it brings to the table and doesn't have, and make a nutrient blend that will work just for mead. And I think that that would work well for this kind of a research. And that's my presentation. I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Elizabeth Tomasino for all her hard work helping me improve with science and writing and everything in between. And I learned a great deal from her as well as working with her. And Dr. Osborne, thank you for joining my committee on a late date and for all your help in the winery. And Dr. Penner, thank you for being here. And Dr. Radnicki. In addition, I'd like to thank all the people in the lab who've been helpful for literally for years. Whether it's Sam and Ashley and Chase helping me refine my protocol, whether it's Jordan or Chase again, or Rachel or Megan helping me with doing data collection, whether it's Anthony or Kim or Angelica as part of my cohort, thank you, all of you, for all the help you have given me. And that goes the same for faculty and staff. You guys are some of my best friends, and I really appreciate the support I've gotten literally for years from all of you. To the mead makers who helped me with my survey to make sure that what I was doing was relevant to the community, I appreciate it. And especially for Karen for donating to me a considerable amount of honey, to which a great deal of effort was put to make some seriously good mead. Mostly worked. And finally, to my wife and daughter for not leaving me, for being very supportive and very helpful, and the best little research assistants I could ask for. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Yes?
If I understood what you said, you made replicates for each treatment and then combined them?
That is correct.
Did you notice any difference between those replicates? Were they fairly the same?
I made the replicates in 2 batches. In one batch, I made 2 of each type, and in another batch, I made a third of each. So there were 3 for each of the 12 treatments.
Okay.
And I noticed that there was, while I was collecting data, a different temperature and different Brix levels. They were not statistically significantly different, but I did notice a difference. So the blend for the individual treatments was a little wider than I would have liked, but I did not notice any significant difference at the time. And when I looked at the analysis later of the samples, looking at things like the RS, the YAN, and the pH, they were not significantly different.
And what went into the decision of combining them instead of testing them separately?
Some of them were tested separately, and if you look at the water chemistry slide, you'll see there's 2 key letters, the little letters on all the columns except ethanol. That's the means of the tests of the individual replicates. I could not do that for ethanol because the ethanol test required a larger volume than I had set aside, and so I had to test the actual treatments themselves. But for each of those other values you saw, they were the average, the mean of the individual replicates for each of those treatments. So T1A, T1B, T1C, those numbers were averaged to make T1. Thank you for asking. I did not, was not clear.
So, Jack, what went into the decision of deciding the temperatures you chose? You mentioned about staying below 35, but the PDA here is still at 35, but you
Right.
chose 24. What was the thinking behind what temperatures you chose?
When I spoke to the meat makers, the commercial guys, I reached out to about 24 of them, half of them got back to me, and they gave me different processes. There's one guy in California who has a microcontroller, and he has a graph like this on how his temperature goes, and I can't do that. 2 or 3 other people let it go ambient. They don't know their temperatures, and that terrifies me because that's how I make them. Of the people who are doing control with glycol, the number 1, 2, and 3 temperatures were 55, 65, and 75. And so because those are the ones people are using in production, those are the ones that I chose to use for my study.
So to optimize, how high could you push the temperature?
That is a future work question, and I would have to think about 3 things. Number 1, what yeast am I using? And what is its known comfort level according to the manufacturer? Number 2, what else am I doing to the honey besides just adding it with water? Am I adding in another adjunct? Am I doing something else that's going to change how much heat that container can hold? Because as you know, fermentation itself generates more heat, so you've got to be careful. But if I keep those things under control, I think you could probably go right up to the yeast limit, but that's something that would be another master's project. You can cite my stuff.
I noticed